The end of the 1980s brought much more than a new decade. Everything was changing, and it was arguably one of the most exciting times in modern history. By the end of 1990, Ronald Reagan was out of the White House, Margaret Thatcher was out of number 10, and England were out... well, enough said about that. The pop culture was evolving at a rate of knots, and to an impressionable young kid, it was an amazing time to be alive and immersed in all the music, movies and culture that were arriving on the scene. In video games land, no one was in any doubt about the most exciting arrival on the biggest video games console on the planet. Super Mario Bros. 3 had been advertised, teased, and even had a movie made about it, starring the kid from the Wonder Years. Wonder Years indeed. Christmas 1990 was going to be a very exciting time for children all over the world. So spare a thought for those who got to open the wrapping paper to find Genghis Khan instead of Super Mario Bros. 3 as their new Christmas NES game. But who was Genghis Khan? Well, for those not familiar, Genghis Khan was the founder and emperor of the Mongol Empire. He launched the Mongol invasions that conquered most of Eurasia, reaching as far west as Poland and the Levant in the Middle East. History considers him to be responsible for the devastation and mass murder of any civilization that challenged him. Those that refused to surrender suffered enslavement and wholesale slaughter. Historians argue that he was responsible for the very first case of genocide, along with ethnocide, and kept many wives and concubines. A study in 2003 found evidence that Genghis Khan's DNA is present in about 16 million men alive today. This guy clearly flies in the face of Nintendo's family philosophy. So why would such a wholesome games company decide that a game around the father of genocide would be a good idea to give it their seal of approval? Well, they must have let this one slip, right? The publishers, Koei, were a licensed supplier to Nintendo at the time, and released similar games to this under different titles to appeal to different demographics, seemingly. Perhaps this was the answer. Perhaps the game was so good and the demand was so high that Nintendo let this slip for the sake of the video game's culture and customer satisfaction. Well, we couldn't have been more wrong. This game was terrible. The game is a turn-based strategy, similar to Risk in that respect, and that's where the niceties end. With options in turns such as war and spying. The game gives you princes as young as 14 to assign war duties to, and spies have the option of searching, wreaking havoc, or simply killing. You can train your populace, your army, and your princes, engage in diplomatic actions and philosophies, and move your troops around to your strategic advantage. To win the game, you have to basically commit as much war atrocities as possible and become the ruler of all you survey. Genghis Khan is a text-based game with a few graphics, mainly the map. The faces are pixelated and crude, and the soundtrack is the sore combination of monotony and repetition. Nintendo really dropped the ball on this one. Their reputation for licensing poorly made games by this point had been established. There were even a few questionable releases up to 1989, mainly based on adult movies such as Predator, RoboCop and Platoon. Opposition attitude towards too much violence in movies and video games was already around, but that was towards games like Space Invaders and Zelda. This game invited you to recreate the actions of a man that practically invented genocide. This wasn't Double Dragon. Anyway, the game came and went to little fanfare. With the year being 1990, pretty much every game did by comparison to Super Mario Bros. 3. And as a one-off, it was just poor judgment on Nintendo's part that a more ethical stance wasn't taken on this game. I mean, it wasn't like it was going to become a franchise. The Super Nintendo was coming out to compete with Sega's Mega Drive. Nintendo needed to be whiter than white to win the war with the new technology. It's not like we would see Genghis Khan 2, Super Genghis Khan, for the Super Nintendo. Genghis Khan 2, Clan of the Grey Wolf, was released for Super Nintendo in 1993 and released across multiple platforms. Essentially, it is a modern version of the original NES game with very little differences and a few more game options. It didn't add anything more to the initial game's objectives of commit any atrocities you must in order to take over the board, and Nintendo had done it again. Had the world learned their lesson from these two releases that brought nothing in terms of video game evolution and glorified the de facto father of genocide? Nope. Japan would have Genghis Khan, Aoki Ōkami to Shiroki Mejika 4 released to them on the PlayStation and Windows PCs in the year 2000, keeping up with the revolution of the Civilization era of games, especially the Windows version, but no change to the original aim set out on the NES. Fortunately for Nintendo, they decided it wasn't for them. To put it into context, if it needs to be, anyone in modern times that decided to make a game putting you in control of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich with the aim of setting out for world domination would not have even been allowed through the reception of the offices of these games companies' buildings. The Civilization range of games, arguably the best in its field, doesn't even include Adolf Hitler, though our old friend Genghis makes an appearance in the later games, which shows developers' sensitivity around the issue of genocide and war crimes. Couple this with Nintendo's family-friendly attitude, and you have to question what they were thinking to license and distribute such a controversial title, let alone it being a poor one. Maybe Genghis Khan on the NES was an inspiration or even a consideration to the Civilization franchise in terms of development, but as a games manufacturer, to release the game to children based on one of the most savage dictators the world has ever known is irresponsible. For parents to buy the game for their children is just wrong, and for the child to ask for this game for Christmas, well, that's just red flag city. Nothing good could come out of this game but disappointment and a strange lust for world domination by any means necessary. Kids, if you wanted something a little stronger than Mario Brothers, you should have maybe started with Mega Man.